Suboxone Manufacturer CEO is in prison for his role in the illegal sales and marketing of that drug. He was convicted in October, sentenced to 6 months, and just brought there a few weeks ago. I'm going to talk about what he was actually charged with and how it might impact the recovery community. I'm going to mention here right away that none of this is an accusation against the drug buprenorphine, okay, which is the active ingredient that's in Suboxone. Buprenorphine is in a few products that are used for opioid substitution treatment. It's used in Suboxone, Subutex, Subuclade. It's what we call a partial opiate agonist, okay? And since it binds to the opiate receptors and it activates them, but with a lesser binding affinity than some of those full agonists, okay, the drugs like heroin, oxycodone, hydrocodone, codeine, methadone, since it binds very tightly to the receptors but doesn't elicit that full opioid response, we can taper people off the full agonist and then onto buprenorphine so they can avoid the withdrawal symptoms and then reduce the risk of immediate relapse. Okay, so that's why we give buprenorphine-containing products. Now, just that fact alone, buprenorphine treatment being so widely administered to people with opioid addictions, that alone is controversial. If you don't believe me, just look at any post or article or comment made about that drug, and there will be guaranteed arguments in the comment section there. So this story, where the CEO of the manufacturing company literally goes to jail for lying about its product, that doesn't help any of that. Especially keeping in context that the Sackler family, okay, hugely contributing to, if not outright starting the opioid epidemic, not one of them spent one single minute in prison. It's very, very hard to get an executive with billions of dollars and access to the best lawyers in the world to go to jail. But crimes in general and just the fines and penalties that go along with the misleading of the FDA and the public, they're still relatively common in big pharma, especially in the realm of behavioral health. That just tends to be worse. You really don't see it in some of the other areas of pharmaceutical care, at least not nearly to the degree that we see with behavioral health. Not because other companies are necessarily more virtuous or anything, but because it's just a lot harder to do in other areas. For example, if there is a particular infectious disease, okay, we quickly identify what bug is causing it, we isolate it, then we develop a specific targeted drug to attack it like a magic bullet. We've been doing that for almost a century. Western medicine is great when it comes to treating something like an infectious disease. Just look what what we're doing right now with the coronavirus. Within months of this thing being out, we have a vaccine. It's almost hard to believe. 1 year ago, we're completely blindsided by this novel virus. Okay? Novel meaning that we've never seen it before. And in a matter of months, we're making these huge breakthroughs. The opioid problem, or really any other mental health condition, the opioid problem has been at epidemic levels for decades, and not only have we not made significant improvement, it just continues to get worse. And the opioid epidemic, by the way, when I say opioid epidemic, when we talk about that, we're talking about the overdose epidemic, okay? We're not saying that the epidemic is the number of people using these drugs. That could be considered an epidemic too, but that would also apply to virtually every other potentially addictive drug. We're consuming more alcohol than we ever have been before, more benzodiazepines certainly, more stimulants are being prescribed, obviously more opioids. But the epidemic part is the fatal overdose, all right? Deaths are usually what get the public attention, and that's what's unique about the opioid problem. The death toll from mid-2019 up through mid-2020, it was the worst ever recorded. There was 80,000 some people. And it's important to note that only 3 of those months were in the COVID era, so to speak. So I would not be surprised if over that next 12-month span, we're going to hit 100,000. So that's the immediate problem that we're trying to fix. And in that respect, buprenorphine products certainly immediately reduce the risk of relapse and accidental overdose following a heroin or a fentanyl detox, at least in the short term. And most of the studies that people reference when they're talking about the advantage of buprenorphine treatment are studies looking at the risk of overdose during the first 6 to 18 months, okay? buprenorphine and methadone treatment are certainly superior to full abstinence over that time period if the target outcome is survival, okay? Not dying from opioid overdose, which seems like a pretty relevant outcome to target. The longer term data, though, is not nearly as favorable with buprenorphine, but like I said, when the epidemic is fatal overdoses, that tends to be what we target. All right, but I'm kind of getting off topic, a little bit here. Like, my point is that when a drug is very controversial like this, like when it stays controversial, stuff like its manufacturer CEO going to prison, it's not good. Okay, so what did Invidior do that was illegal? Suboxone came to market in the early 2000s, and it was this little, tangy orange tablet that you would put under your tongue. It gets absorbed. It has a very long half-life, so you can just dose it every day or every other day. When that pill was coming off market, I think it was 2014, it's probably about 7 or 8 years ago, Invidior had their researchers conduct clinical trials that compared that tablet up against their new product. Okay, this new product was a film tab. Both were sublingual, but the strips were individually packaged, and they just look less like candy than those little hexagonal orange tablets that they used to have. So their studies concluded that these new strips were safer, they were less likely to be misused by the user, but most importantly, and this was the kicker, that they were less likely to result in accidental overdose by children. That was like one of the big parts of this study. One of the dirty little secrets of Suboxone therapy is a lot of people that take it have little kids at home. A big difference with Suboxone compared with methadone, for example, is that Suboxone is mostly prescribed on an outpatient level. You can get your quantity of 30 at the pharmacy, and you don't have to stand in line every morning for your dose. There are obvious advantages to that, but one of the drawbacks is that when you have this little orange candy-looking thing laying around, lo and behold, little toddlers can't be trusted not to put that in their mouth, and it becomes almost instantly fatal to them. So Invidior submitted trials showing that their new strips can't be misused the way that their pills could, and like I said, most importantly, that they're more safe to be around homes with little children. The result of this was that nearly all Suboxone prescribers almost exclusively now wrote for the strips versus the tablets. Also, all of the insurance coverers, Medicaid paid millions upon millions of dollars they have paid in Suboxone film tabs. The only problem was that Invidior fabricated these whole studies. It turns out that it's not safer, doesn't lessen the likelihood of misuse, and it's not safer around kids. Actually, more kids have overdosed with the film tabs than they did with the strips. So the federal government was tricked into paying 30 times more than they otherwise would have needed to, and the federal government does not like being tricked like that. So the result is the CEO goes to jail for 6 months. It's unfortunate that that the worst two stories with the pharmaceutical industry over this century were both related to the opioid epidemic, but it's not surprising. I mean, take a disease that affects millions of people and that we still have virtually no idea really what to do about, and that's just an exact recipe for huge amounts of fraud, and huge amounts of fraud is what we see in the administration of, in the treatment of, in the medicating of. It's just a fraud-riddled industry, and it sucks. And that's part of the reason that people get so frustrated, I think, and kind of combative when they talk about it. So this guy's in jail for 6 months, okay, which is a big deal. It's a big deal because that hardly ever happens. But anybody who's done real time is looking at this story just thinking like there are literally street level users that get years upon years who come out and they're penniless and skillless and they have a felony on their record, who see this kind of sentence and just can't believe their eyes, and they would be right to be disgusted by it. And I don't really have much to say about that, I mean, other than that's extremely unfair, and I'm with you. But I do think that it's a good example. It's a good thing that they're making an example of these guys. Hopefully they become much better at scrutinizing studies that are funded by the manufacturers themselves, because this was literally the same thing that Purdue got in trouble for. And they were allowed to get away with it for so long. The public really needs to be able to trust the studies, trust the science. We have to. I probably know a little bit more about the history of some of this stuff than most people, and it has made me a little jaded, and distrusting of that industry. Once in a while, somebody will comment to me. They'll say like I come across anti-pharmaceutical, and I wouldn't use the word anti, but I'm definitely skeptical. Definitely skeptical.